Thank you, Kath, for that wonderful introduction. And it is my real pleasure to sit with two remarkable women who are doing just extraordinary work, have always been, but now with the pandemic, their impact is just become greater than even before. And I would love to talk to both of you about your work, but mostly I want to get to know you a little bit more. So let me start with the first question. Both of you went into this as prominent public health communicators, and this past year has been unprecedented. What are you taking away from this past year as your role as a communicator going forward? And what have you learned from the public? Michelle, can you start?
Sure. Thank you, Seema. It's such an honor to be here and to have this conversation with you and one of my heroes in public health, Dr. Ann Schuchat. It's a real privilege. So let me start there. Let me also just say that for me, I don't see myself as a powerful communicator, but I felt that I had to rise to this occasion because this pandemic challenged us in so many ways. And in particular, the enduring nature of the pandemic forced us to all take a deep reflection on what we're doing well, but more importantly, what we haven't been doing so well. And where I landed early on is that we have to be better listeners and we have to better communicate. And I say that because the beginning of how we manage the risk reporting and the reporting of how to mitigate risk was all about communication. And we have to do it in a systematic and thoughtful way that gets to the most vulnerable populations first. And I think we can do better there, and we must do better there.
Dr. Shukert, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that communication has never been more important than this past year, and it's never been more difficult. The environment, the voices, the confusion. So I think for a takeaway for me is how important it is to have redundant strategies to communicate in many different ways. Here at CDC, we have lots of ways that we can communicate, but some of them weren't possible this past year, and we really needed to find other ones. We also needed to, communicate not just through broadcast or through print or through the web, but through others, really through messengers who could take the information and carry it on. So I think, like Michelle, I took away from this past year how important it is to listen, to understand what the concerns of whether it's our public health partners or clinicians or the public themselves, but to listen with humility in terms of the voice that we would bring.
That's interesting because, typically we sometimes don't give public enough credit, and their engagement and their thirst for knowledge and for information during this pandemic has been unprecedented. What have you learned from your engagement with the public?
Let me start there and let me just say that the engagement has to be consistent and it has to exist long before there is a crisis. And so the investment in engaging with the public, and as a public health person, our clients are the population. And so we have to have a continued conversation that goes on well before crises arise. I'll tell you one of the most interesting observations I made just in the last couple of weeks. When we were trying to figure out how to address vaccine hesitancy here in the Boston community, the biggest thing that happened was Dr. Anthony Fauci deciding to accept an invitation, to local church, Roxbury Presbyterian Church, and that he would attend a town hall and he would speak to this church community meant so much just because they are seen, their invitation was accepted, and a trusted authoritative voice came to speak in an African American community church. That matters. Building the relationship, being present in the community, critically important.
And what is your thought on this?
I think often the best questions come from the public, the things that, both understanding what's confusing, what are we saying that isn't being heard the way we hope it will be heard, and what are the things we haven't thought about that can really open up new lines of investigation or response. Lots of questions over the year about the vaccines and their development. And yes, it's extraordinary how science delivered and we got vaccines that are highly effective and safe, but really understandable that people had a lot of questions about them and that many wanted to see others go first and that some brave people went first in the trials and then early in the implementation. But I think recognizing that there are a lot of different experiences, and this pandemic has touched so many people in such difficult ways that trying to learn and understand what the experience was like and how we could find better ways forward. So I think the humility and respect and an open mind have been important. This virus is one that you cannot have too much certainty about. It keeps throwing us under the bus, or throwing new challenges at us. And so, being really open and honest and transparent about what we know and what we don't know is critical. But listening to what the concerns are is also.
Yeah. Science has delivered, but society must engage. And, that's the lesson that we learn again and again and again. But speaking of the future, what is your biggest hope for the future beyond the pandemic? What public or societal accomplishment would you like to see in the years ahead? That reflects the real promise that science can deliver.
That's a great question. And what I'd like to say is I'd like to see us dismantle those systems, policies, and processes that drive disparities. The American Relief Package is a much needed source of funds and support, investments in public health workforce development, investments in the operational muscle of public health. I'd like to see those investments reach the communities that need it the most. I really want to see this happen where we build capacity, and that means providing technical assistance to communities that have been robbed of the opportunities before, and really building sustainable systems and frameworks for improving health for all and decreasing health disparities. We have not always been the A student in operational implementation of opportunities that come along, and we have to improve our capacity to build back better.
Well said. Anne?
I think this past year, this whole pandemic has shown us what happens when we don't invest in public health, that a public health threat, a new virus, can affect every single person in the world in really negative ways, and that the strength of our public health system, whether it's data or workforce or the cultural competence of our staff, as well as our ability to surge, our ability to incorporate innovation. The strength of that public health system is going to define the impact of the next threat and the way out of this one. And we need to expand who's in that public health community, and we need to expand in the ways that we operate. So I completely agree with Michelle's analysis and way forward. We always learn over and over how important it is to engage, how we can't, in the middle of a crisis, fix longstanding challenges. But I think I really hope that this is so bad and has been so prolonged. I hope that we, as a community in the U.S. and as a global community, really take seriously the need to stick with this, to not just take it as an emergency response with short-term investment, but invest for the long haul, which means pretty intense transformation.
Well, Michelle, Anne, thank you so much. This has been just a remarkable conversation with two extraordinary women leaders. And I just want to wrap up by saying that science always brings hope, science delivers, but we must engage with society in order to reap the benefits of science for society. And finally, science, public health needs to be accessible to all, and it should not be a privilege of a few, but something that is accessible to everyone, everywhere. Thank you very much for this great conversation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. A real pleasure.